Bill Connelly, ESPN, crunches a lot of things, including information, stats, number, data. He joins us, 365 Sports. Bill, thank you so much for giving us the time. I know it's busy. A week from today, the first college football standings will be released, and you have some trends. What are a couple of the interesting trends? Who needs to get can't afford to lose a game?
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting is we don't necessarily know that immediately. We don't know how the committee is going to view the mega powered SEC and Big Ten and whatnot. We don't know, two-loss Alabama is going to be a really interesting team. Where do they fit in? Over time, I've kind of stumbled across a little formula that gets most of what the committee does, where you just kind of take half polls and then half measures like, power ratings like SP Plus and FPI, resume ratings, mashed all together. Right now it says Alabama should be about 14th based on how the committee normally does things. So they obviously, it's going to be really hard for them to lose again and make it. LSU's a must win. But, what's a BYU going to rank right out of the gates? Where they haven't really necessarily beaten a top team yet, but they've looked really good. Indiana. There are just a lot of I'm just really curious to see how different the committee views things this first time around.
How much or how difficult is it to equate the human factor into this? Because you mentioned Alabama, and they're a team that's been sacrosanct in the playoff. That they got put in over an undefeated conference champion last year. So how do you kind of work around they'll make a justification for this team no matter what to figure these things out?
Yeah, I mean, that kind of changes from year to year. It's not necessarily because most of the time Alabama earned their spot, so it wasn't like, they were always getting too much benefit of the doubt or anything. But yeah, I mean, this little formula that I've been playing with, basically anytime the committee does something different, it's extremely noticeable. Like top 10 or 12 or 15 or something last year was exactly as I had kind of formulated it up, except Alabama was 4 instead of Florida State. That was the only difference in the entire rankings. So it'll be interesting. And again, the idea of, how much better is the SEC than the Big 12? It's better. In the offseason, I tried to look at schedule strengths and whatnot. I think it's about a win difference, basically, like 10-2 in the SEC is about the same as 11-1 in the Big 12. But how's the committee going to view that? If an Alabama ends up 9-3 versus even like an 11-1 BYU or 11-2 after the Big 12 championship, it's going to be really interesting. And I'm always for don't lose your games. Like the teams that lost the least should have a very good opportunity. So I'm curious to see, last time they didn't even put a team that had lost 0 games in. So we'll see.
Bill, you've made it very clear in your SP Plus rankings that it's looking forward, right? That it's a forward-facing metric. And it's very interesting talking about the Big 12 that K-State's actually your highest-rated team right now at number 15. Then there's Iowa State at 20, and then BYU down at 26. What is I guess your takeaway from what you've seen from those three, because those are really the 3 playoff contenders in this league, and what sort of separates them at the moment in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, with Kansas State, they're probably the most well-rounded team overall. Their offense and defense have both stepped up at times. Basically, since that disaster at BYU, Kansas State's easily been the best team in the conference. And it's kind of hard to go against that. Obviously, the Kansas game made that a little blurrier, but the blowouts of Oklahoma State and West Virginia, this isn't a conference that has blowouts right now, hardly. Every game's decided by like 4 points right now. So the fact that they kind of had that upside, and then when that upside didn't present itself and they had to grind out wins, they did that too. I'm feeling pretty comfortable about Kansas State being kind of borderline top 15 team. And I guess for both BYU and Iowa State to a certain degree, it's about defense first. The offense has been timely, but Iowa State's defense right now, they're 6th in the country in points allowed per drive. They're top 20 in my defensive SP Plus, which adjusts for opponent. They've just been really – Rocco Becht has come through at key times. The passing game's pretty good. The run game could probably be more consistent. But everything I just said kind of applies to BYU too. They're a little more aggressive defensively, but they're still very good defensively, and they've just gotten the right – the perfectly timed plays from Jake Retzloff. I was very impressed, by the way, with BYU against UCF. UCF is a very dangerous, just an underdog, a kind of team that's going to self-destruct and make a bunch of great plays and terrible plays and everything else. But BYU laid the hammer down right at the start of that game, and UCF never had a chance to get all the way back in it. So I thought that was a really nice statement by them.
Do you feel like and again, it never works out this way. Like there's some that wondering about Indiana, if they run the table, do they even get to play for the Big Ten title? Those scenarios are there, but there's only a month left. Can the Big 12, and what would the scenario you think be to get two teams in the 12?
Well, that's what's really interesting about this right now is both the ACC and Big 12 are looking at having kind of probably multiple teams at that 11-win mark. Maybe the 11th win comes in the Big 12 championship or something, but that's going to put a lot of pressure on, in all of our scenarios. Like I talk about the Big 12 all the time. I love it. It's every game is decided by 3 or 4 points, but that typically means you end up with like a 2 or 3 loss champion a lot of the times.
Yep. Right
now, we're not looking like that. Iowa State and BYU setting the bar where they have and coming through in a bunch of these close games. They don't have much time left to lose 2 or 3 games. So it really does kind of look like Big 12 could have, 2 to 3 teams at that 11-win mark. ACC could have 2 probably. And I don't know what the committee does with that, because we're going to have plenty of 10-2 SEC teams, and they're going to play harder schedules and looked worse at times. And I would, like I said, I always go with the, I don't care that the SEC has the hardest schedules in the country sometimes. Like if you hate the schedules and you hate getting left out, then leave the ACC or the SEC. I'm sure, the Big 12 would take Ole Miss if they wanted them or something. But overall, I'm really curious. I think I with the formula approach, I think I kind of know what the committee's going to do, but we don't know for sure till we see it.
What are your thoughts on Notre Dame and what they like? Are they locked in now? Do you think with 1 loss, no conference title? I mean, that like they don't, their schedule just kind of seemingly gets easier outside of Army's their toughest game left.
Yeah, I think at 11-1, I think pretty much anybody's going to get in from this point forward. I mean, like I said, maybe they can talk themselves out of a Big 12 or ACC team if there's enough 10-win SEC teams. I don't know. But I would say Notre Dame at 11-1 is getting in. The Louisville win, Louisville's still a good team. They've lost a bunch of close games, but that was still a good performance. They looked really good against Navy. Navy self-destructed, but they still looked really good. And that's a big part of it for me is, yes, it's important who you play, but it's more important how you play. And basically, since that awful performance against Northern Illinois, they've looked like a playoff team. And that kind of matters to me. So if they can beat Army, which is, I think Army is quite a bit better than Navy. So that is going to be an interesting test in its own right. And then you go out with a bunch of pressure and you win at USC. If USC hasn't packed it in, they seem to be maybe looking better now. If you do that and you've looked the part for 2 straight months or almost 3 straight months, I'm fine. They should be in. I bet they are. I don't know what combination of SEC wins would have to happen and knock them out, but I'm pretty sure they'll be in.
What team or maybe even a couple teams have been the most interesting for you to kind of follow along with this season?
I always like the surprises. I mean, that's always what catches my eye. Georgia doesn't interest me during the regular season because, half the time they don't seem interested in the regular season. They just try to, shift, play as much as possible in second gear and only shift out for the big games. So that's not really, I watch all those games, but the ones, the Indiana story is kind of the number one story to me because I already liked Kurt Cignetti. I thought that was a great hire, and I thought maybe because it was a great hire, they'd play like top 60 ball this year, and they've been legitimately top 10 good this year. Haven't played. Strict the schedule is what it is, but it's about to get a lot harder with Ohio State plus the Michigan teams, and they've just looked phenomenal so much of the time. So that's been seeing how that roster has been constructed and how they've been able to look like they've been playing with each other for 20 years already. Like that's been really impressive to me. And then, the teams in the Big 12, a Big 12 champion every year is going to be a team that won like 6 close games. And just how you go about doing that is always really interesting to me. Whether it's with the defense that Iowa State has, kind of the bend don't break, the BYU defense that has come out of nowhere really to flip things around. Kansas State having more athleticism than most the Big 12 teams really, especially at the skill positions. Like that's all been really interesting, and that's what I end up following the closest, at least until I absolutely have to watch the big teams play in the biggest games.
Is there a chance that a Boise State, Memphis, Army knock out a Power 4 conference champion?
Yeah, I mean, I think especially with Boise State, I guess it depends on who they play, but almost anybody they play in that first round of that playoff, they're going to have the best player on the field in Gen T, and that's something that you can't really always say about a G5 team, even a really good one. The upside he showed, I mean, they should have beaten Oregon. Oregon had 2 return touchdowns in that game and barely beat Boise State. That was very, very impressive. This is a good UNLV team that they just went and played at UNLV and beat them. They probably beat them again in Boise at the end of the year here. So I think they have a certain level of upside that a lot of G5 teams don't have. But this is a really interesting group too, because Memphis does have upside. Tulane almost beat Kansas State. Like, they have a good amount of upside. And by the time the playoff rolls around, they won't really have a redshirt freshman quarterback anymore. He's done really, really well over these last few weeks. And then Army's Army. Army, nobody wants to play Army. And, they've almost beaten top teams before. And right now they've shown more upside than they typically do. They're not just grinding out like 4 plays, 10 yards over and over and over again. They're making big plays. They're a really, really solid team. So whoever gets that spot, if it's one of those teams, they have enough upside or uniqueness to them to at least really scare a 5 or 6 seed, whatever it ends up being. I think that's really important. We know they're going to revisit this. We know the SEC is going to try to legislate 6 automatic bids and get rid of the G5 spot and all these things in the offseason. It would be a really good time for the G5 team to look good in this playoff.
Do you feel like if Indiana had a different name on their jersey, they'd be ranked higher than they are?
I know their strength of schedule hasn't been very good, and that I'm sure that would hold a lot of teams back. I mean, I guess the pushback there is Michigan's schedule last year was atrocious, but no, I mean, I think basically they did. Like I said, I love Cignetti, and it took me a while to really accept, like, wow, this really is a good team. So, I think our preconceptions there are what they are, but we'll see. Like the formula approach, the computers don't love Indiana just yet, I guess, because of the strength of schedule aspect. So I accept, as long as they're not like 22nd when the rankings come out next week, I think, I'll probably accept if they're in that kind of the high double digits. That's probably fine. If they get to 11 wins, especially, they're probably in regardless. So, and it's really cool.
Is there anyone that you think is a total fraud out there?
If you're talking about whom SP Plus thinks is overrated, that's probably the best way to put that. It hasn't bought all the way in on Clemson yet. I mean, my eyeballs have, like, they've looked the part since they looked so bad in week 1. They've looked really, really good. Pitt is only into the 20s in my rankings, along with BYU. Those are the teams that, especially Pitt, like the ways they've come up with to win games have been very entertaining, but we'll see if they can beat Clemson, some of the other teams down the stretch here. So those teams, I mean, those are probably, I want them to keep winning because they're really fun stories, but they're probably, a lot of teams end up, hit November at 7-0 or 7-1, something like that, and they end up like 9-3, and we kind of forget just how highly they got in the polls briefly. But no, those are probably the most, in terms of the teams with really, really good records, those are probably the teams I'm most skeptical about.
Bill, a non-playoff contender, Baylor, but Dave Aranda on the hot seat this year. They've won a couple of games in a row. They're at 47 in your S&P Plus. Just what do you get from what you see in terms of the numbers from them? Is there anything notable, or are they just kind of a middle of the pack sort of team, along with most of the Big 12 in some ways?
Yeah, I mean, that's been the biggest thing. Early in the season, I was really impressed, I will say, with just the way. Even though there was a point where with their body language, especially against like Colorado and BYU, it was like Iowa State too. It's like they knew the self-destruction was coming, but they were still fighting really, really hard right up until it did. And, they don't hold on to leads great, but they come back from deficits. They never stop fighting. And the fact, in the Big 12, you're going to play a lot of close games. If you can stick together like that, they've got enough upside that they started to figure things out these last couple of weeks. I realize, Texas Tech and Oklahoma State aren't as good as Iowa State and BYU and maybe Colorado, but they didn't win these games by 1 or 2 points. They actually put them away. So that was really impressive. They haven't quit. They're 4-4 season. Let's see. The projected margins I've got from SP Plus for over the next 4 games are 0.3, 0.5, 8.6, and 1.5. So they could finish 8-4, 5-7 still. It's all still on the table. But I've been really impressed with the resilience, if nothing else.
Bill, I want to go back to one of the questions I asked you, Bill, again, Connelly with ESPN, about, Can a group of 5, a Boise State, Memphis, Army, knock off a Power 4 conference champion in the first round? Is there any chance any of those teams can get in the can slip ahead of an autonomy or whatever the hell we call those 4 conferences as far as taking one of the automatic berths?
We were curious about that a few weeks ago. I do think that at this point, Iowa State, Kansas State, and BYU will prevent that from happening. But if there is a year where everybody destroys everybody in the Big 12 and the champion ends up 10-3, as opposed to like a 13-0 Boise or a 12-1 Boise that only lost to Oregon, I think in that situation, or if Army wins out here, I guess that's still on the table. They beat Notre Dame, they blow everybody out, and that's going to be really interesting. But I don't think they're going to get it over a one-loss, ACC or Big 12 champion. And right now, it looks like that's what we're going to have. So, yeah, with a couple extra close losses for Iowa State and BYU right now, I'd absolutely be thinking about that scenario.
All right, great stuff. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Paul.
one more question, just because we don't get to talk to you very often. I'm curious, as a guy who loves the game so much, everybody's got split opinions on the playoff and all this. How is the extra emphasis on the playoff not changed what you do necessarily, but kind of changed the big picture discussion for you? And as a fan, what have you thought about kind of the way it's changed maybe the narrative during the regular season?
This is what I hope to see. The way we've been talking about things over these last few weeks, everybody seems to be having a really good time, unless you're a team that's lost a couple games you shouldn't anyway. And, right now, I put out a piece on Tuesday, just kind of about, or on Sunday night, just kind of mapping out November, all the biggest games of a given week. And basically every remaining week, there's like 18 games that impact, a team that has a shot at the playoff right now, whether it's through the conference title race, whether it's an at-large berth or whatever. And so there's just so much to pay attention to. And there are so many fan bases that seem engaged right now. UNLV drew over 40,000 for that Boise State game. I think the highest they'd had in was it Allegiant Stadium? It was like 35,000 for Iowa State, and they had like 42,000. And basically there are so many of those. Indiana's selling out every game. There's just so many interesting stories right now because everybody, obviously when we got the playoff 10 years ago, the focus all shifted to that, and that became kind of a negative in that if you didn't, if you weren't one of the 4 teams, it felt like a pretty big letdown. But letting in these extra spots, offering mulligans to people, extra mulligans to teams, it really, I think it feels like a lot of fan bases are engaged in a really good way right now. And that's really good for the sport. And that's, I joked about the SEC and 6 automatic bids or whatever, but I want the biggest possible umbrella here and the most fans engaged as possible, because that's what's most fun to watch on Saturdays. And right now, we'll see how they screw it up with, extra bids or however they're going to do it. But right now, it feels like this is what's supposed to happen. And it's really been fun to follow.
Great segment, Bill. Thank you. Perfect timing with what's happening next week. We appreciate your time. Good luck crushing all those numbers together, crunching them. Yes, not crushing. And we'll talk to you hopefully maybe at the end of the year. Thank you.
Sounds good.
Bill Connelly, ESPN, with us